Brown.
Grove!
Okay, welcome
Live!
to another edition of the Lean Newsroom. And so this week we're going to be talking about the social journalism panel that was at the University of New York that was hosted by our very own Carrie Brown Smith. But before we get into that, we decided we're going to just highlight a couple of things, news from the past couple of weeks, and things that might affect you in terms of trying to do your job social journalism-wise. And the first thing we wanted to highlight was twitpic. Do you use twitpic, Brown?
You know, I think I did originally when I first started using Twitter, but more recently I usually just use, Twitter's own service. It's just a little bit more seamless, it seems like to me, to do that. So.
No, I'm the same way. I think I used twitpic when there wasn't an option, and then there was you would sometimes see that YFrog and other photo sort of solutions that people.
Oh yeah, YFrog. I almost forgot about that one. Yeah.
But twitpic was the one that I would use, and I integrated it in there. But like you said, once they integrated it in with the format or with the actual interface, I pretty much used what was in Twitter. Or when I started using Instagram, sometimes I would use Instagram because Instagram used to integrate really well with it. But let's now. So the big news is that they are actually going to be shutting down, unfortunately. And it's one of those things that you often see is that as things move so quickly. This is one of the points that we highlight in the book we're working on in terms of innovation, how quickly things move. And so what's happened, you see that in this case, Twitter learned about, they saw that twitpic rose up, people started really using that photo sharing function, so Twitter saw that as something they needed to integrate. twitpic still ended up around, and Twitter felt strongly enough that it wanted twitpic to change its name. And so that led to twitpic saying, you know what, here's the quote that was written by twitpic founder Noah Everett. Unfortunately, we do not have the resources to fend off a large company like Twitter to maintain our mark, which we believe wholeheartedly is rightfully so. That's unfortunate, but if one of the things you want to do, you want to make sure before September 25th to get your photos off of their server. And they have a function that you can download them and you'll get a zip file of all of your photos. The issue with that, it's like a one-button, one-size-fits-all kind of deal. The Next Web shared this option as well. There is a site called MobiPicture, which now allows you to, it provides you a little bit more tailored download for twitpic, so you might look at that as a potential option. So that's too bad, but hey, that's how I remember I remember when Google got rid of Google Reader, and I was heartbroken. But you adapt. Now I actually love Feedly more than my Google Reader.
Really? I haven't. I got an account on Feedly, but I just haven't really used it that much yet. So you're really liking it a lot?
You know what I found is it reinvigorated my commitment to RSS feeds, because you remember, RSS feeds were like, the inbox zero. You had this goal of, oh, I'm going to read these RSS feeds someday, and then what would happen is you would get these like, oh, holy crap, I've got 1,000 things I've got to read. And then you feel bad, and then it's kind of this self-perpetuating self-loathing. But once I went back to Feedly and organized my feeds, the interface is great because especially on the iPad, it has like a flipboard kind of interface.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's really, RSS feeds to me are like email newsletters. They've kind of come full circle, and they're relevant now.
I really like the idea of them. But I find that I tend to use Twitter kind of as my RSS feed these days, partly just because I sort of I like the kind of serendipity of it, that you don't really quite know what you're going to get in any, like, 5 minutes that you spend there. But yeah, you're right. I really should probably get back into RSS because it is a good way to keep up with things. That's for sure.
The thing that I found is it kind of clears out some of the noise that you sometimes get on Twitter. Because a lot of people were saying, you're not alone in that, Brown. There are a lot of people I run into, and they're like, why do I need an RSS feed? Twitter does the Twitter is my RSS feed, and I think there's a valid argument to be made for that. But a lot of companies, they will put everything is on their RSS feed. They don't put everything on their Twitter feed.
Right.
So sometimes you can find that. And the other thing that I find, and this is for places that have a leaky paywall, the RSS feed gives you an in to some of those articles.
So, that's a good point.
Yeah. So it helps you at least kind of glimpse what's on the website from the RSS feed. So if you're a cheapskate like me, it gives you an option. We're lowly, low-paid professors that don't have a lot of money to do this kind of stuff. So
no, totally.
Anyway. Well, that's our tip. So watch for twitpic and think about those. Think about Moby Picture as an option, and just look at that as another one of those cautionary tales of how quickly the technology changes, and how you have to be able to keep up with those. So.
Right. Yeah. No. Definitely.
Well, now we'll move to our main topic of the day, which was the social journalism panel. And if you look on the hashtag SocialJ on Twitter. I think I have that here where I did that. Oh, that was the hashtag, and you can find all different kinds of things of what people were tweeting, including myself and Carrie. So Brown, tell us a little bit about the panel and how things went. This was last Thursday, September 11th, right, in New York City.
Right. Yeah, just about 1 week ago. Well, I thought it was great. We were really lucky that we had 5 really outstanding panelists that joined us who brought a variety of different perspectives. It was just really fascinating to hear sort of how they have approached engaging news audiences and getting their audience to participate and interact online in some creative ways. We had kind of a variety there. Amanda Zamora was from ProPublica, which is, of course, a nonprofit investigative news startup, but they do some really great work, both digitally and face-to-face, engaging people even before their stories are published. And she shared a number of different examples of that. Amanda Mickle has been really working on crowdsourcing for quite some time now. She was involved in Huffington Post's Off the Bus initiative, which was citizen-driven campaign coverage, and now she's working at The Guardian. So she has just some really smart things to say about how journalists' thinking on engagement has kind of evolved over the past, 5 to 8 years. So that was really interesting to hear. Really, all of the panelists had some really great stuff to say. And it's just really encouraging to see people that are really kind of pushing the envelope on, trying to sort of just go beyond the idea of just, okay, social journalism just means we're churning out headlines every day, we're tweeting those out, we have an account and a presence on all these social networks. I mean, that's great. That's kind of phase 1 of social, but they've taken it to really this next level where they really are interacting with communities. They're listening in more sophisticated ways to what communities have to say. They're really trying to measure their actual impact rather than just looking at page views or likes or what have you. So it was pretty interesting to kind of hear what they had to say and all that stuff.
Yeah, there was one of the speakers, and I need to look back through my Twitter feed to remember who it was that it really caught my, it really sort of, I really liked the frame of thinking, and I think it was Amanda from The Guardian, where
Hmm.
she really looked at sort of a level playing field between the journalist and the audience,
Hmm.
and saw the journalist as, I don't want to say as part of the audience, but it was, I really like the idea of talking about this as a coverage community, right? So that and this kind of goes to what we were talking about a week or two ago on this, about that idea that it's not all up to the journalist to make everything happen, that actually the journalist really depends on a coverage community to
Yeah.
make the journalism work. I thought that was a
Hmm.
really smart. I was very impressed by the panelists, and the whole thing is available. It's archived online, so we
Yeah.
can put a
Yeah.
link
They
up
recorded it. Yeah.
on the website. Um,
Yeah. I saw something this morning. Now that you bring that up, that I thought was a really good idea, but I'm curious to see what you think. There's a open government organization in Chicago, and they've been developing some new apps, basically, civic engagement apps where you can learn more about what your government is doing. So kind of journalistic, although not strictly in the traditional sense. And, one of the things that they've done is they've actually, using money from a grant that they have, they've actually sort of created a paid team of civic app testers where basically they pay people, I mean, not like a ton of money, they pay them like $20 or whatever, to help them test out these apps. And I think it just really made a lot of sense to me, because sometimes I feel like we just get into this mode where we're asking people who are already, extremely busy, or in some cases don't have a lot of resources. Journalists are asking them more and more for their participation and their feedback and whatever else, and that's great. I'm all for that. But I mean, I'm wondering if there are ways sometimes in which, we can find ways to, like, I mean, not necessarily just financially, but what are we really giving back in exchange for that participation, as opposed to just kind of sucking all people's time up and then kind of, I don't know. I thought it was really kind of a neat idea, but maybe turning it into a financial transaction ruins the
right.
journal civic spirit of it. I don't know.
No, I really like that, the way that you're thinking about that in terms of the giving back,
Yeah.
and and I'm probably a little biased in this regard, because that's one of the things, since we've been working, since you and I left the industry, and we've been thinking about how do we continue, top quality journalism without, especially when we're seeing so many journalists that are being laid off, and news organizations that are strapped for resources. And the more I keep coming back around to nonprofit, because I keep thinking it's that push for profits, especially the ones that are the publicly traded companies, where you have the pressure from shareholders to say, what's our stock price going to do? And you're constantly, and that's a real responsibility when you're a publicly owned company. You have an obligation to your shareholders. So I understand that, but I think journalists, that's where the tension and the conflict is, because you also have this commitment to your audience and commitment to your community to say, okay, I've got to, I have to cover this and do this. I have this social responsibility to my community. How do I cover it responsibly? Which sometimes it's expensive, and sometimes it's not going to make us a lot of money. But that's one thing I really liked about this panel, is because they weren't afraid to touch on that. I think it was the woman from Chalkbeat who was saying, I'm totally comfortable. I want to know the bottom line results of my stories. I want to make sure that my stories are actually having some impact, and having some actually tangible impact on the bottom line. I thought that was interesting that she raised that
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Although, I always kind of, there are times when I also agree with my new colleague Jeff Jarvis that I do think that the marketplace does provide some discipline in a sense, in terms of making sure that you're giving people what they really want. I mean, when I teach entrepreneurial journalism, I do tend to push my students into more of a for-profit model, not because I necessarily think that's where they need to end up, but because I think when you're learning, understanding sustainability on that level then helps you, even if you decide to go the nonprofit route, you understand like the business a little bit better and some of the challenges that you'll have there, because nonprofit sustainability is still a big issue. It's just, it's just different. You're dealing with foundation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah,
it's a different model, but you're still always grubbing for money to sustain yourself. I mean, at some level,
right,
you got to have that. So.
And I don't mean to idealize it. I know
what you mean, though. I think that's a good point.
And I think I think it's Brant Houston who always says that, who always makes that point that nonprofit's not it's not a solution. It's just a form, right? It's a form of incorporation. You shouldn't look at it as the solution to your problems, and I think that's a valid point. And you're right. You do end up you have to get foundation money. You're still as cognizant about your revenues as a for-profit organization. So that's true. But I don't know. I just look at some of the. I keep looking at examples like ProPublica and the Texas Tribune and some that are formed with that foundation funding model, and then they go out and the NPR model of having members. That helps get more to this idea of you're a participant in this process, and we're all members of this community, and the membership may be not just that you're contributing photos and content, but maybe you're contributing money. You're helping sustain the journalism, if that makes sense. No,
I do like the membership. I like that. It does make it does make a lot of sense in terms of a way to kind of think about it and structure it, for sure.
Well, and I agree with your point. I mean, I think for-profit organizations are part of the puzzle. I mean, that's part of the journalistic puzzle of making sense of the landscape. So I mean, they're all going to be working together.
Right.
I just think sometimes, and not all for-profit organizations are this way, but some, I think, when you forget about the community aspect of it, because and the reason why I think about that is the community aspect takes time, and it's not always, you don't always get immediate ROI from trying to engage with your community.
Right. So. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where there is just a lot of sticky, and I think in the panel they sort of talked about that a little bit. I mean, it is interesting, and I think it really points to, what with our new program we really want to help students try to navigate, because obviously a lot of this is about building relationships with your community and, establishing that kind of trust so that people are willing to, help you and, do all these great things that we're talking about, tell you exactly what they need and, be sources for your story and all these kinds of things. But I mean, there's just all this like stickiness there. Like, where is the line between that and exploitation? Or what happens when you're doing a story in which, in journalists we've done this historically, where there are certain villains. You know what I mean? Certain members of the community may not like that. Like, how do you like navigate and negotiate those kinds of situations, even in this model in which, you're envisioning a much stronger relationship with the community. I mean, there's just it's kind of like these ideas are so kind of almost obvious, like at the higher level, but then it's the devil's in the details of how you figure it out. And that's what I'm kind of interested in a little bit. I don't know.
Well, and that's the thing, is that I think that's one thing I really enjoyed about this panel is you had 5 people in there that they've got their hands dirty. They're doing the nitty-gritty and the hard work of trying to make sense out of this. You know, it's one thing to talk about it in the abstract and say, oh, we need to, you know, we need to include the audience more in what we're doing, and we need to break down the walls. But at the end of the day, one of the things you got to do is, hey, we got to publish something. You know, we got to put something out on our website. We've got to get that video out, and it's up to us to make that happen. And especially in a 24/7 environment, we got, you know, we got to feed the beast. You know, which is what it's always been. You know, even back before the web, when you had, you know, when it was just the newspapers or the 5 o'clock newscast, we were running into that too, right? You had to fill your 30 minutes of time on the TV newscast, or you had to fill your 12 inches for your story in the paper. You know, so you're kind of bound by and to some degree there's still some of that even online. You're like, okay, when's our next post coming? Because if we're not updating regularly, we're going to get lost. You know, they're going to forget about us.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true.
Was there anything that the speakers said that you noticed that focused on that aspect of it, the grind of it? Was that a theme that came out?
You know, they didn't really address that quite as much, but I think that these were sort of you know, specialists who are working for organizations that are on the cutting edge. So I think they're given a little bit more time to kind of focus on the engagement reader relationships piece, as opposed to in a traditional newsroom where that may just be like, that's just an add-on to all the other stuff that you're already doing. So I think it's a little bit different in that sense. I mean, that's the one, you know, it's great to have people who, you know, have so much expertise, but they're a little bit of outliers in some sense because, you know, because they are so good at it, they've been tapped to basically, you know, lead it rather than kind of do that in addition to doing all the reporting that you might normally do. So,
was there from the panel? Was there one sort of example or one aspect, one lesson that sort of stood out to you of like, wow, okay, that's a really good example of something that more newsrooms should be doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of them, but just one that is just popping into my head right now. Zach Seward from Quartz was talking about how, you know, when they originally launched, they didn't have a homepage at all. They do now, but, you know, their stories lived or died based on how well they did on social. You know, and it was also a brand new site. So I think it's really interesting, you know, to tap the lessons that he learned from being part of that. And, you know, he was saying that what they've learned works really well is one of two things. Either it's a very long form, you know, in-depth piece, or it's really short. Like, here's just one thing you need to know about this, bam, done. What doesn't work well is those things that are kind of in the middle, you know, not really short, not really long. Those were the things that they tried to avoid writing and just didn't do very well on social. And ironically, of course, that's the length, you know, that middle length is really sort of the traditional, typical length of most news articles that are still being published today. So, I mean, that's just kind of one small thing, but I thought it's just very interesting to sort of think about that and also to kind of pay attention to other things that they're working on. You know, they've also had a lot of success with charts that actually aren't just illustration of the story, but actually tell the story. You know, that's another one of the things they found were really effective. So just kind of interesting to learn from them, since they did start off with sort of a purely social kind of approach.
Well, the other thing that Quartz is like Medium. That one of the things I really like, and I've got them on the screen here, is this method of side commenting, where you actually, instead of commenting at the bottom of the story, you add your comment on and annotate a paragraph.
Yeah.
I just think that's a really what I've noticed is that you're much less likely to just sort of mouth off because you feel an obligation to the content. You know
Yeah,
that
I really
that
like. Yeah, I think that's super smart.
yeah, and both Quartz and Medium do that, and I just think it's a good way to foster healthy healthy discussion, which I think is critical in building that community. You've got to have people who feel like they can participate in the site, and sometimes that's in the being able to respond to something that touches them or captivates a thought or sparks a thought in their head. So.
Right. Yeah. No. Definitely.
Um, yeah, the one thing there was one theme that I highlighted when I was listening in that I really liked was this phrase of, as a journalist, you're organizing a community of people who participate in the reporting. I thought that was a really compelling idea. In terms of it gets back to that idea that you are sort of, instead of you are someone who's taking down all of the information and collating the information, you're sort of guiding everybody else and making sense out of everything that they are contributing to the community, which I just think is I don't know, more and more I think about it, the more I think that's because I think to some degree you see that's what happens on Facebook, right? That basically what people are doing is, and their content communities, so to speak, are basically their friends and family.
Yeah.
So that basically what they're doing is they're listening to some of those people, but then they realize there are holes in those content communities, and they're incomplete because people's biases start to sneak in. So they go looking to creative, they go back to the traditional ones, but they still want it from a more community standpoint.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. I'm excited because in our degree program, we want to learn from people that have done kind of traditional community organizing, like political campaigns and advocacy groups. And I mean, obviously, in journalism, we typically have a very different orientation from that, and we're very suspicious of it and everything else. But I'm fascinated to learn more because I think there's a set of skills there about how you kind of activate a community and get them, energized and actually taking actions that can result in the impacts they want. I mean, I'm just really interested to learn from some of those folks because I think it could be really applicable to journalism. We've always stayed away from it because we're afraid of bias or whatever. But
right.
I think you could use some of those techniques.
Well, that's why, I mean, you always go back to that idea, right, that we need to quit thinking in this wrong-headed notion that the journalist has to be objective and think about it from that the method is what needs to be objective. It's not saying that, okay, I'm this person who's devoid of thought. I'm this person who has a method of gathering information that should be objective, that I should go in. And the thing that I find with the best social journalists is they take that approach with building the community. They go in with this sense of humility, and they don't go in saying, okay, this person can be part of the community, but this person can't. And they predefine the community instead of saying, okay, here's all these people that want to participate and are interested in this. Let's listen to all these voices and try to see how they fit together to help us understand whatever the community is. So whether it's a geographic community or a content community or a topic community, it starts to sort itself out, because then that's where that marketplace of ideas comes to work, right? So if you get somebody who's on the fringe, the community itself is going to see, you know what, Joe over here who keeps making these sort of weird, strange comments that are off point. The community itself will gravitate towards the people that bring the more relevant stuff to the surface. And I think you see that in well moderated or well organized commenting communities. So like on Reddit does that very well. Reddit has that way of with the right Redditors, and I think that you can find a lot of tech forums that do that too, that people who are constantly contributing the meaningful content and the meaningful answers are the ones who surface to the top. So what journalists have to do is and news organizations to say, how do we do that with community content or news content, and allow, you know, early in one of our research projects when we did Minnesota Public Radio and the public insight journalism, I think was an effort towards doing that idea, you know, of building these people who could connect. But any other last takeaways from the panel?
I don't think so, Groves. That pretty much covered most of it. Okay.
Well, be sure and check it out. That's on. You can find it on Ustream. We'll put a link on our Google Plus page, and let us know if you have ideas for something that you want to hear. You can reach us both on Google, CarrieLisaBrown@gmail.com. Do I have that right?
Yep.
And GrovesProf@gmail.com. We'll get those emails, and if you've got an idea or something you think would be worth us talking about on a future episode, anything to do with the future of journalism or how we save journalism, right? We have to save journalism, right?
Right.
Well, I think it's like the Earth, right? Journalism will always be there in some form. It's just what form is it going to take? But.
Right. Yeah. Very true.
All right. All right, well, we'll see you next week, next Thursday, sometime between 12 and 2, depending on our schedules.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then we archive them all. They're on our Google Plus page, so we will see you next week.
Nice.
See you later.